Hello and welcome back to the Fullerton College Pre-Press lecture. This is Professor Ben Hewitt, and we're doing PIA's section 5.1, reproduction processes, part 2. So here we are, the well, I'm going to let that goof stay in my video. The major printing processes are letterpress, flexography, gravure, screen printing, lithography, and digital non-impact printing. We'll go into those in detail right away. Letterpress. So the initial first type of printing ever invented was letterpress. Uh, Here's where we credit China where credit is due, because they were using movable type back in 1000 AD, 400 years before Gutenberg. And then Gutenberg in 1452 comes out with it in Germany. The main thing that Gutenberg does for printing and for all of this is the metallurgical prowess of figuring out that alloy. By making better metal to make his type out of, he found a way of making it a very usable, very reusable thing, because you're able to remelt the letters and cast them into the ones you need if you don't have enough letter E's, for instance. The press on the right is a letterpress, but it is by no means Gutenberg's. Gutenberg's was a modified wine press, a big wooden frame with a giant screw, and you pulled on a giant piece of wood to pull that screw down to press the image onto the papers. Uh, this rotary system with automatic feed and automatic inking wouldn't come around for another 500 years after him. Anyways, moving on. So here's his Bible. Gutenberg's thing was to print the Bible. He thought that it was not a good idea for only a few elites and religious political leaders to have access to the actual religious text everyone was following, and thought that everyone needed the ability to read it for themselves and understand what it was saying. Good thing that never turned into anything like wars, revolutions, dissent, breaking apart of churches. Yeah, everything was just peachy keen after this, right, guys? Right? Anyways, so his Bible, though, was a groundbreaking invention. He found a way of taking something that took years to produce a single copy and made it possible to make multiple copies a month. And it was really popular. Books were status as well. Books were a thing that only the most wealthy people could afford, because you had to be able to hire a team of monks to hand copy them for months and months and months. It cost a lot. Anyways, Gutenberg's Bibles are printed, at least the words, although as we discussed, the red text in them for the words that are spoken by important people in the Bible. Okay, one specific important person. The red letters were all done by hand still by monks, as were the pictures, or they call them illuminations in these old manuscripts. So you'd print the black text using his patented soot and linseed oil mixture. And then you'd have someone hand draw the pictures. That's why they all look slightly different, and why it is said that the pretty one is here in Pasadena, in Southern California, in the Huntington Library. They have a nicer copy as far as the quality of the illustrations. I mean, they're all beautiful, don't get me wrong, and the one in the Library of Congress is nothing to sneeze at. It's just, if you really put them side by side, the pictures are a little bit better in the one here. Hooray. And there's a fake copy, later on reproduction, at the printing museum, which kind of shows you what it's about, but it's not to the level of what the actual originals were. The relief process looks like this. The hand in the picture is holding a piece of lead type, and there's also lead type that's cast in a whole paragraph put on a wooden block. Around the time of the later Industrial Revolution, when it hits America, they start finding ways of making type out of wood effectively. Basically, when they find a way of kind of semi-automating the process of wood cutting and using kind of rotary, not lathes, what do you call those, router type systems, they find ways of having machines automatically reproduce wooden type, and wood type becomes cheaper, and they're able to move away from the more expensive metal alloys. Also, using the metal alloy to cast a thin veneer to put on top of a wood block lets you build that whole paragraph without spending all of that metal, which would have been significant. So in letterpress, you have something called a chase and a platen. So the chase is the area where the type is held, and the platen holds the paper. You mash the two together. Yes, we already know Gutenberg was a part of that. In the early days, it was carved from wood. Type was not always carved from wood in the early days, but yes, in the middle days, they were carved from wood, and they made a lot of wood block letters. That's also something done kind of in your frontier printing press places, basically when you have less access to good metal. By the time you come up with Linotype, you're able to type out a sentence or a paragraph and then cast it in a mold that your typewriter created and make a solid metal section. And then when you're done, you chug it back into the big pot of molten lead and it reclaims, which is kind of a cool thing and a bit dangerous. So on letterpress, here's a picture of the side view of the type. The raised surface holds the ink and the image sticks straight onto paper. You mash that thing like a rubber stamp, except it's metal, straight onto the paper, and the ink goes from one surface to the other. It's relatively useless in an industrial sense at this point. There's a few things it's still useful for. Mostly it's used for people who want to make really cool art books. Like the hipsters found this and they love it. And gosh darn it, I love it too. You make some beautiful prints using letterpress. Although one of the weird historical ironies is the things people like about letterpress today are the things that people hated about it when it was actually being used as a process, which is to say, people love to see some impact. They love to see some slight debossing on the paper where the lead mashed itself into the substrate. And honestly, historically speaking, that was considered poor print quality. You wanted to get them just to kiss the surface, just hard enough to move the ink from one surface to the other. And if you left a dent, you were a sloppy, probably unskilled printer. But that's what they like today because it shows that it was done on a letterpress. Like, okay, well, if you want to do poor quality on purpose, I suppose you could do that. But anyways, I like it for other nerdy historical reasons. So the letterpress, here's a rotary system. One of the big things about the rotary press was you didn't have to put the ink on by hand. You would have to bounce, or they call it pounce, these leather balls in ink and work the ink. It's a very sticky, kind of peanut buttery texture until it was liquid enough and then butter it onto the text yourself by hand. The rotary press instead found a way of using the pressure between rollers to transfer the ink from roll to roll to roll. And the action of rolling is what warmed up the ink, put some energy into it, made it into a more of a usable, consistency, helped take it from being a hard ball of oil and turn it into something sticky and liquid and able to be used. So all the rollers would be working the ink. The rollers would be constantly mashing it and moving it until it got enough energy into it that it warmed up and got the right consistency. Then the plate cylinder, sometimes you'd even have cylinder plates at this point of letterpress. And the impression cylinder against it would push again, so you'd be able to roll paper between them. This also helps you automatically feed paper through a system, which means there's no longer a person manually putting each individual sheet on there, which is, in a word, efficient. Here's a really cool picture of a really cool machine. It is not, when the world allows us to do such things again, when public health is at a place where you can go visit. If you've not been to the Printing Museum in Carson, you guys should visit it. It's really cool. Typically they will, if you have a tour with them, they will let you operate historic machines. You don't get to operate the Linotype, but they'll demo it for you. This one's a bit temperamental, but the Linotype machine is huge. It's, as you can see at the bottom, it's rows of keys like a keyboard, and all that machinery on top is a complicated system of pulleys, levers, chutes, columns, and things that cause little tiny matrices, which is their word for molds, to go fall down in the order you typed them. So as you type, it creates a custom mold for the sentence you just typed, and then and it automatically pours molten lead from a giant vat in the back into your into your mold to make you that particular piece of type. You can even sometimes make souvenir Linotype bits and take them home from them. It's kind of fun. I have one somewhere. I would show it to you if I knew where it was. Anyways, Linotype. Another thing that I talk about at the Print Museum, which I'll throw in here, a big push towards working equality. The Linotype machine opened up huge opportunities for women in the workplace. This is 1890s, not nearly soon enough, but still, at least progress was made. It was found that women with their much less chubby, stubby man hands that I have were excellent typists. They discovered that women were able to type out faster, more efficiently, and with fewer errors blocks of text for Linotype. So they would hire women specifically. They would seek them out to be their Linotype typists to get much more accurate typesetting. And that let them get into the industry and start working in graphics. The legacy still exists. It's one of the more equitable workplaces out there is in printing compared to other industries, if you're talking about industry anyways. So Sadly, yeah, there's not a whole lot of advantages except maybe you like the way it looks today for letterpress. Like I said, the hipsters love it. If you got that lumberjack beard, your plaid shirt, and your glasses, you're like, yeah, man, this is it. Um, but it is slow and cumbersome to try and set up the image carrier. You have to hand set the type. You have to put it in backwards and upside down on your composing stick. You have to set all these things physically in place to print each page. So if you're doing like a fun artsy poster, it's not too bad. If you're trying to do a book, it is a significant amount of work. All right, let's see if we can get through one more section of print before I run out of time on this video. Let's talk about Flexo. Flexo is related to letterpress. It's still a relief process, and it's mainly used for packaging. This is one of those things where I'm gonna have to tell you this particular series of slides and training that we're using in our course comes from back east. The PIA's headquarters are in a small town outside of Pennsylvania. It's in Pennsylvania. Why is my brain not working? I'm so sorry. Philadelphia. Yeah, Franklinstown. It's outside Philadelphia. So every once in a while, there are going to be some language differences between the West Coast and the East Coast. When I was a kid, the West Coast and East Coast hip hop scenes had a big ordeal as to which one was better. Clearly, it was the West Coast. But aside from that, they will say things that we don't. Remember, out here, if you get a can of bubbly, sugary drink, we call it soda. But if you're back east and you order the same drink from a restaurant, I guess I wouldn't bring it to a can, would they? But if you order some bubbly, sugary drink at a McDonald's or someplace back east, you're ordering a pop, not a soda. And if you're in the Midwest, up in like Milwaukee or something, you're ordering a Coke or a cola, right? It all means the same thing, but we have different names for it. Or if you're in California and you're down south and you want a lot of something, you might ask somebody to give me a grip of those. But if you're north of Bakersfield, you're going to ask for a hella. Likewise, the freeways changed name out here. Down here, you guys can go and hop on the 5. And the 5 goes right through Orange County and drives you all the way north. And once the 5 goes through the Grapevine and passes through, I don't know, about Bakersfield, it just becomes 5. They don't say the in NorCal. It's really awkward. They say take 5. You're like, 5 of what? We say take the 5. We know you mean a thing. Anyways, so all I'm trying to say is we don't really call it a blanket here. We just call it a plate. Blankets, we try not to use that phrase for other things because a blanket has a specific purpose in offset lithography. So we try not to confuse that. Flexographic plates were originally made from hand by rubber. They would actually be liquid rubber poured into molds to make the plates. Now they're done using photopolymers and lasers, which is way cooler. Anyways, so flexography, here's what the plates look like. They're rubber or plastic. It's a polymer, really. It's somewhere between rubber and plastic, and it's made synthetically using a lot of petrochemicals. But that's the plate carrier. It looks in a close-up a heck of a lot like letterpress, except that it's flexible and made out of rubber instead of rigid and made out of metal. Just like the letterpress, you look at it, the raised areas are the places where the ink sticks to. The lowered areas, there's no ink. So the yes ink and no ink, the image area, non-image area are all made out of raised surfaces or not. The ink and the plate come into direct contact with the substrate. This actually pushes directly onto whatever it goes onto. Here's some samples. If you look at the print sample, I do like these images, by the way. On the left, you have letterpress. You can see the image quality of how it works. And on the right, you have flexography. You'll notice the flexography has a very hard edge and then kind of fades towards the middle as compared to a more uniform image put out by letterpress. That has to do with the fact that the rubber compresses slightly and will actually push and squeeze and force some of the ink out when you press it against the substrate. That's one of the ways of identifying a flexo print if you're looking at it under a loop close up. We actually have this flexographic press in our lab. It's a Mark Andy 2200, a 6-color large system. You can print process color on here and you produce labels and other things that are otherwise hard to print on. The chief advantage of flexography is that it can print on things that you can't print on otherwise. It's the off-road tire of printing. It may not be the most accurate print job with the smallest dot size, but the fact that it's just a rubber stamp means you can use almost any kind of ink. On one side, that means you can use really weird things that stick to plastic, and it's very hard to stick to plastic. And the other side of it means you can use food safe, FDA approved. In fact, it's the only thing the FDA approves for printing on food packaging. So when you get those French fry boats at In-N-Out, you know what type of printing they used to make it.